Is this thing still on? Sorry, it's been a little while since I've last put out a video on here. I've been really hard at work working with my team on new products. And since I've last done a video, we released our Smart Outlet 2, which was an evolution of our first gen Smart Outlet, adding cloud capabilities as well as compatibility with Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant. Today, we're releasing a product we've been working on for over 2 years, which is the Smart In-Wall Outlet. I sat down with Richard Gunther, who's a co-host with me on the Smart Home Show podcast, to talk all about this product, and I hope you enjoy our conversation.
Well, let's dive into our first discussion, and that is about your new product. So as you mentioned, you guys have been working on this for a long time. The primary consumer product that's branded ConnectSense that people are aware of is the double outlet that you plug into a wall outlet. And you've had 2 gens of that. Your first generation is now a little over 4 years old. That's hard to believe.
Yeah.
That's
crazy.
really hard to believe.
We worked on it a year up until that too. So yeah, we've been working in this space, consumer smart home for over 5 years now.
Yeah, and then of course, you've done other things in the company that are related in this space, sensors and so forth. So you have the background there, and you've been at CES every year, kind of giving hints about the other stuff that you work on and that you've been thinking about. So you've been building out a back end that you partner with other companies to let them use, and you've shown some concepts of products in the past. And the one thing that you've been pretty consistent about is this wall outlet thing that you would, I think for 2 years, at least 2 CESs, I believe, I've seen the wall outlet as a project that you guys were going to undertake, and it's here now.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about like how you got here and what all is in this product. And I guess the first question I would have is, you already have an outlet that's incredibly convenient. You just plug it into the wall. Why one that now I would, get out my screwdriver and get out my wire cutters and replace the thing that's already in the wall?
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw an opportunity here to kind of keep going, and certainly a lot of people liked our form factor for the first 2 smart outlets we did, but some people ultimately didn't love having stuff sticking out of their wall. Depending on how important it is to have things, look nice and neat and sleek and integrated. Some people they still wanted that experience you get with a smart outlet, but didn't want to have the big plastic brick sticking out of the wall. So that was kind of the first and foremost of why we wanted to kind of continue down this path. Some of the other things were, just talking to customers, both on the consumer side and also outside the consumer market. People wanted better energy data. So, we provided some basic energy data in the first outlets, but it wasn't really capable of really detailed energy data. And then, people were just looking for capable and reliable hardware from what was out in the market already. And as well as, most of the stuff that's on the market today is all 15 amps, especially outside the consumer market. There's definitely a broader need for stuff that is 20 amp compatible. So for those that aren't super familiar with 20 amp, you may or may not have these in your home. Definitely I would look around appliances like maybe your washer dryer. Those usually need higher amp circuitry.
Washer almost definitely a washer, or maybe a refrigerator, sometimes an oven, but oftentimes ovens and dryers, depending on whether it's an electric dryer or not, may actually be running on 220.
Right. Yeah. So the way to see this too is it's like the standard plug, but it also has a little kind of side notch in it. So things that are 15 amp, a standard plug can go into a 20 amp outlet, but things that are 20 amp cannot go into a standard 15 amp outlet. The physical plug will not fit.
Yep, that makes sense. Now, there are lots of connected outlets in the market already, right? And I mean, you could argue that that space is a little commoditized. So I guess the first question about getting into this is like, if you're bringing a product to the space where there are already lots of competitors out there, what are you doing different? Like, how are you differentiating your product from something I might buy at, say, Home Depot that's branded Leviton, like all the other outlets that I see on the shelf?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think there's a couple of things to hit on there. I would say it's more commoditized, definitely on the smart plug side of things and on the external side. Um, and obviously, there's a ton of competition from dumb outlets, but not as competitive in the smart in-wall space. So some of the things we focused on were, something that's super important to us always is to make the setup and use of the product as easy and simple as possible. So when we were looking at this, one of the challenges we had in the setup process is that iOS or Android, to do it securely and to do it well, you have to add some extra data as part of the pairing process. And as you know, in HomeKit, you have to pass a HomeKit code. And so we wanted to be able to do that in an easy way. I think iDevices actually patented like a weird little HomeKit flag that pops out of theirs.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting challenge because an in-well product, you literally stick the back of it in the wall. It has to be powered to get it paired. You don't necessarily want to put something on the front of the device where people can see it. The form factor is challenging. So one of the things that we looked at and ultimately decided on is using NFC for pairing. So whether or not you're aware of this or not, iOS or iPhone 7 and later has the ability to use NFC reading in the device and read NFC tags. And so with that, you can actually use that. It's equivalent to the same data that's in that QR code for HomeKit. And so, we just felt that was a really great and simple way to have that code readily accessible to a user at any time when the device is installed in the wall. So you simply just tap it right in the middle of the outlets, and it will initiate the pairing process, either in our app if you want to kind of go deeper on it, or in the Home app. And we also use that NFC on the Android side as well. It's a little bit different in how we implemented it, but we have additional data that we use for just keeping that process secure and making sure that you're provisioning the right device. And something cool that we're actually doing on the Android side, I think something that's unique about in-walls is that I think you're more likely to go broader with an in-wall solution than you are necessarily with plugs or smart plugs. So for somebody that's going to go big on this and put a lot of these in their home, we wanted to make it as easy as possible. And so on the Android side, we're securely storing your Wi-Fi credentials in the app. And as you provision subsequent devices, you literally just tapping it, and we're going to send the Wi-Fi credentials right to the device. And the chipset we use uses BLE for provisioning. So we're able to send that. We use the data in that tag to find the right BLE for that outlet, and then pass it the data. So it's a pretty sleek process, and we're able to do it really quickly on Android and on iOS.
Very cool.
And then I guess one other thing kind of in the install space, most in-wall devices, whether it's a light switch or an outlet, um, will kind of come with wires on the back of it. And then you use these complicated wire nuts to kind of connect your wires to the wires on the device.
Yeah,
And,
sometimes they're called like a pigtail.
right. And then you have to cram all that back into the wall when you're installing this device. So, given the constraints that you have in a in-wall form factor, obviously space is really important. And so, as is that space in the wall, obviously adding all the circuitry for Wi-Fi and control and energy monitoring and stuff takes up space. So we wanted to have as little of a need for extra stuff in the wall as possible. So we did terminals on the back of the device rather than having the wires and the wire nuts. So I think it makes for a little bit simpler of a process. I talked to some electricians and through the process here, and they really like that of not having to deal with wire nuts and extra stuff. So,
And just to clarify what that means for everybody who hasn't done this themselves, on the back of many outlets, when you install an outlet, there's usually either a screw that you can connect the wire to by looping the wire, or a hole that you can slide the wire into. You have kind of a clever hybrid of that where the wire itself goes into a hole and then you tighten it into that terminal with a screw on the bottom side of the device. So it's a pretty clever solution. And you're right, it avoids that craziness of having the additional wire and the wire nuts, which themselves take up space in the box.
yep. So yeah. Additionally, kind of for other differentiating things, we wanted to support all the major voice ecosystems. So, I think when you start to look at some of the lower priced in walls or just lower priced devices in general, we've talked about this before. A lot of those don't support HomeKit, and since HomeKit's something that we've done in the past and know what we're doing there, it was important to us to have that in the mix here. On the outlets also, we wanted to have dual control and monitoring. If you go into this space and kind of look at all the options, and you have to be really careful because sometimes you'll come across something that says it's controllable, but often a lot of the cheaper ones will only support control on one of the two outlets. So dual control and monitoring was something very important to us.
Now, on the monitoring, is that something that HomeKit has kind of as a capability that it is aware of, or is that an extension that you've added on top of the normal HomeKit control that this would be able to support?
Yeah, we actually did this in the earlier outlets as well. So HomeKit doesn't have official characteristics for energy data supported in there. It's something I've shared with them and kind of expressed like, hey, you guys should add this officially, and not something they've expressed interest in. So as a manufacturer, we're able to put in our own custom characteristics. The downside of that is, you're not going to be able to access those in the home app. You could, I guess, access it in some of the third-party apps that expose everything.
Right.
But you would kind of have to know what you're doing. So we do expose it in our app, and we make it pretty clear. So you could do stuff with that. So some interesting things I've seen done there with that energy data is things like people have used it in a projector setup in a movie theater type thing, where when they see energy use in the projector, they use it to dim the lights and kind of trigger off of some of that energy data.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
So yeah, and I also wanted to talk about, in terms of the energy monitoring data, there's a lot of devices out there that support energy monitoring or say that they support energy monitoring. But the data, as we've kind of looked at it coming out of those devices, is not very accurate, and it's not very good. So the analogy I've used a lot here is it's kind of like standard definition versus 4K TV. A lot of these devices are putting out data that's standard definition. You might be able to see a little bit of what's going on, but for us, we really wanted to provide very accurate data. So our stuff is within 0.1% accuracy, so very good. And we actually have a discrete chipset on the board for that energy monitoring data.
And then does that HD like example, does that also translate to the frequency with which you're capturing that data?
It does. I don't remember off the top of my head how frequently we're capturing that data, but how it's presented to the user is we have both daily, monthly, and yearly kind of historical data, and we're also telling you kind of in your devices that you have that within wall outlets, kind of what are your biggest energy users in your home, so you can kind of dig into that. And we're also tying that to pricing data. So at launch, we're just using a national average, and there actually is a feature where you can put in your custom rate for your utility. Coming soon, we're going to add a feature that isn't quite done yet, where you'll actually be able to put in your location and pick your own utility, and it'll grab the pricing data from, without you having to look it up.
And that's not all that straightforward because many providers use a tiered model where, based on the time of year or even the time of day, the pricing could be different.
Yes, it can be fairly complicated. We do have a service we're working with that gets into some of that complication. So you basically kind of pick your plan that you're on, and it will take that into account in terms of the pricing data.
Cool.
But yeah, and I mean, I've had some interesting conversations with customers, friends of friends. I talked to somebody, a friend of a friend named Joey, just this week. It was a really interesting conversation because he was somebody that was very passionate about solar, has solar on his home, was actually fighting the good fight because he's fighting his HOA over where his solar panels could be on his house, which sounds super fun. I used to live in a neighborhood with a combative HOA. But what stuck out for me with the conversation with Joey was that, he as somebody who kind of looks at all this data, looks at what he's getting from his solar panels, as well as what is in his bill and all that. He'd had a challenge in the past where he didn't realize what was like his power bills were high, but he couldn't figure out why. And so he said to me that, after a ton of digging, he actually found that his humidifier was configured weird and was running all the time and driving his bill way up. So, a few small tweaks to that made a huge difference in his energy bill. So that's the kind of thing we're trying to help people, become more aware of, those small places where, maybe you're using a lot of energy and you didn't realize it.
That's kind of cool. Now, one of the things that I noticed when I installed the beta release of the product that I have, I don't know if I was supposed to admit that or not, was that you have these buttons on the device that let you control it from the device, but they're not buttons. You literally just touch the side of the outlet where the outlet is in the two positions of the outlet, and you can toggle the state of that outlet right there.
So yeah, I mean, I talked a little bit about kind of working with a small form factor and that being difficult. I think when we looked at it, physical buttons were going to have to be kind of another thing in the mix. If we had put physical buttons in there, maybe we wouldn't have been able to do NFC. There were definitely things that we had to kind of take into account. So,
and is that because the physical mechanism for some sort of button that has resistance and everything is going to take up more space than, say, a sensor?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I think everything comes into your space budget, your all the things you have to put into the product. So, you kind of have to make these choices. So, and additionally, like, buttons can be accidentally hit and triggered. and one of the things we really wanted to do was be able to not have physical controls when you didn't want them. And so, with everything we looked at, capacitive touch which is what this technology is. It's really similar to what's in a smartphone. Seemed like a really good fit. We're able to put these capacitive touch sensors throughout the side of the device, and we can do, we can actually do a lot of different things with it. The engineers were trying to be creative and do swipe gestures and stuff early on, and it was a little bit. I didn't like how consistently it worked, so we ended up focusing, and it's now a double tap gesture. So on either of the outlets to turn it on or off. We wanted it to be very intentional. So that's why we did double tap instead of a single tap.
Mm-hmm.
We figured the single tap would be easy to kind of miss trigger. And we wanted to be able to turn off those. So you can actually lock out the controls from the app. So for security or safety reasons. So I've heard that a lot from people with small children. I have small children myself. You don't want them to be able to mess with it. So you want them to be, we want to be able to turn off the power to an outlet and make sure that they can't control it. So it's a little
Or, similarly, you might want to be able to ensure that the power is always on and doesn't get accidentally turned off, depending on your use case.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with the power monitoring abilities that we have, there's a lot of interesting use cases where maybe you just want to monitor the power of something. You mentioned a refrigerator earlier. If you want to know what your refrigerator is costing you, this would certainly be a good solution. But you probably don't want to ever shut your refrigerator off, and you want to make sure that that's not the case. So, yeah, absolutely, that's a use case as well.
Cool. Now, you talked about the 20 amp version, and that's probably what you would use with most refrigerators or a washer, something like that. What, I mean, are there other 20 amp devices out there? Because you can certainly buy 20 amp plugs, but I'm not aware of other 20 amp smart plugs.
Right. Yeah. As far as I'm aware, there really is little to no other controllable and metered 20 amp outlets in the market. So I think that's something that's pretty unique and something that we're excited about. As we said, I think there's only a few small places in the home where that might be helpful, and we're certainly want to explore those. But we think this is going to be a much bigger play in commercial buildings where 20 amp is more often a requirement and a lot more important.
Okay, that makes sense. And then, of course, you're selling this in the United States, and so it has to be properly certified. But if I went on Amazon and just started looking for inexpensive, maybe offshore built and marketed devices, they are certified too if they're used in the US, aren't they?
Not always. So I think when you look at these, oftentimes lower price devices will be ETL certified. So it's still a certification, but it's not really as strong as a UL certification. And in some cases, some electrical codes actually require UL. So why is UL important? In general, UL is testing for safety and fire hazards. So they put these products through a battery of tests that is absolutely grueling. And so, if safety and all that is really important for you, it's something you're going to want to look for on the products that you buy, because some of those other standards are not quite as rigorous. And kind of as we were working on this product, UL actually changed their standards. Always kind of fun because you kind of start down one path and then the ground shifts out from under you. But what was interesting is a lot of the competition has certified under this old standard, and that old standard is expiring. And what that means is eventually, in the next year or two here, they won't be able to produce new product under that existing standard. They can sell what they have, but you can't build any more. So any new product they build would have to be under this new standard. And
Meaning that it needs to be recertified, and maybe in some cases that means re-engineered.
Absolutely. And I would say probably a lot of cases re-engineered because this was a much more difficult standard to pass. I don't know all the details. That's for my VP of engineering probably lost a ton of sleep over that. And all I can say to describe this process, depending on whether or not you're a video gamer, you're going to get this or not. But it's like playing a video game on, the hardest mode, and you get a little bit further and you die. Then you get a little bit further and then you die. And then you get a little bit further and you die.
That's me, not even on the hard mode. That's just me playing video games.
Yeah. So, I mean, this was a long process. I don't even know at this point, that we were going through years ago to try to get this product certified and through. So, we went through a lot of different stuff to get there, and I won't go into all our secrets, but to say that definitely some hairs were turned grayer or fell out through that process.
Okay, so there's a lot in this product, and it's clearly different than the other products that you're going to see out there on the market. That's great. In 6 months' time, in a year's time, people are going to be asked, well, what's new? What's it going to do for me now? And when you buy a connected product, and we've talked about this a number of times, people expect it to get better and better over time. So have you thought about ways that you might enhance this product once it's out in the market?
Yeah, and I'll say this hardware has a ton of raw power in it that we haven't tapped into yet. We, as always, you got to kind of put the baseline down, and in some respects, we also want to see what people do with it and what customers want to do with it. So I look forward to talking to our customers and really getting feedback from them. So I won't go into great details on this because I want to keep some of it to ourselves until it's out. But I'll give you an idea of kind of where our head's at on this. With that really great energy monitoring data that we have, I want to make it easier for people to do something with that data. So right now, if you see something's using a lot of energy, then you're going to have to do some things manually yourself. I'd love to make that process easier for people in the future. And then in general, there's just a lot we can tell from the data we have about the device that's plugged in. And I think there's some really cool things we'll be able to do in the future with that data, just to provide a better user experience.
All right, so let's say that I'm a consumer and I'm convinced. When and where?
Yeah. So, as we release this now, it's this product is now available. So you're going to be able to buy it at ConnectSense.com, and it'll also be on Amazon.com at launch. And I'll just say, definitely appreciate everybody who's listened to this show, and hope that you pick one up and check it out. And I'd love to hear more from you about it.
Very cool.
We wanted to talk a little bit about just this whole process that goes into launching a product and all that's involved in it. And basically what I've been living every day for the last few months, years, etc. So, yeah.
So, one of the things that I do when I'm consulting with a company on product is try and help them think about all the different things that go into taking an idea to market. And we're not going to go from idea to market, but if you have a product design and it involves hardware, that's like a whole other thing from taking software to market. And my expertise is really in the software side. So you have so much more to think about with the hardware piece because you have you need to create reference designs, you need to shop out manufacturing, you have all these certifications. So let's dive into some of all that goes into this process.
Yeah, I mean, I think from, early on as you define a product, then, you kind of have to do, initial prototypes. You know, you have to go into plastics manufacturing. So that's a whole process where, you have to make metal tools and work with people to get that just right. And that's a process where you get samples and you say, all right, well, this is wrong, the color is wrong, this is, all the kind of ins and outs of that. So that stuff happens really early on, and um, has a lot of back and forth with it as well. And depending on where the people you're working with are at, in the case of our plastics were done in Asia. So, you're shipping stuff back and forth, halfway across the world. So that kind of stuff can be very time consuming.
Hmm.
As far as, hardware design and stuff goes too, we would typically do, quick turn boards and use that for prototypes. So, we're testing stuff in office here, just with boards and kind of doing some early stuff there. And that's, not even to mention, stuff like we talked about the UL approval process. So as you're going through those types of certifications and those kinds of processes, designs can change as you're going through that grueling video game. Sometimes you're going to hit a roadblock that's going to require you to change boards and change components and all that kind of stuff. So that's why it can take a long time to get through, some of these processes.
And each one of those, I mean, you're just talking about the hardware piece of it, right? There's software that goes with all of that, software that exists on that board to run the device, and then software that you have to build out for whatever either front end consumer experience needs to exist in an app, or whatever infrastructure needs to exist in the cloud to make it work.
Yeah, so it's a really, we have a really nice, tightly integrated team where, yeah, you've got one guy who's working on firmware, which is the software that goes on the device. You've got other engineers that are working on the cloud backend, the various apps for iOS and Android. And not only that, but you also have to do software and also hardware for the manufacturing process and just support all that. So, as in the manufacturing process, we have testers at different area, parts of the manufacturing process. So probably at larger companies, those are all different teams and different people. But for us, being a smaller company, we have some of the same engineers working on different pieces of that as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
So yeah, and then as you wrap those things up, you got to go through the process of submitting and certifying all those kinds of things. So in the last few weeks here, we've submitted our apps to the iOS and Android app stores. You got to go through approvals for that. There's a ton of approvals you have to go through just for any electronic product, let alone a connected one and all that. So stuff like FCC for anything that's wireless has to go through, FCC approvals.
And I hadn't even considered that. I mean, you have to file that pretty early on in your design process, don't you?
Yeah, you absolutely do. And it actually has to go through physical testing too. So they want to make sure you're using approved spectrums and that the radiation is not too high and all that kind of stuff. So that's a whole process as well. And then, for the stuff in the smart home space, we're having to go through certifications for, Apple, for Amazon, for Google, and they all have their own different kind of requirements, some easier and others more involved. And then once you get through those, they also have, certain requirements around, packaging and, hardware certification, app testing, things like that. So, you get into things like how people's logos look on your box and all that kind of stuff. So there's a ton of kind of hoops to jump through there.
And at that point, I mean, we haven't even talked about what it takes to manufacture this stuff, right? Like you you talked about plastics and stuff, and now you have all these components, just like the plastics, you have components that are going back and forth that you need to be creating and sometimes sourcing
Yeah.
from multiple locations.
So yeah, I mean, components are coming from all over the world, different vendors, things like that, and I mean, and sometimes those lead times on some components can be, months long, and literally, we even had this process where, our guys are at the factory getting things ready, and they couldn't build units because they were missing a screw. So you can you can do your whole job and be missing one small piece, and it stops everything. So
It's just like bringing that IKEA box home.
exactly, exactly.
So
Um,
I guess the thing that I'm curious about there is, did you with your product launch have after you ordered the custom out like exterior stuff, the stuff that you designed, then in terms of the interior components, the electronics and stuff like that, did you have the benefit of being able to use pre-existing components, or did you have to design some of them yourself and get them custom built?
oh yeah, yeah. Everything on I mean, everybody's things are going to be different, but definitely on this product, all of those individual boards um, are completely custom design. In general, we're working with off-the-shelf components, but in some cases, we're having to special order components just the way we need them, um, and special things, for that. So, but yeah, there's a lot of custom work that goes into, very intricate design in those individual boards. And for this product, I think it even has three separate boards that go into kind of a stacked design for this. So it's a very complicated and well integrated product.
And did you do all of this virtually or through the mail, or did you have some people flying around the globe?
Yeah, we did. We had a number of people from our team that went to our manufacturing partner, and kind of work through the initial units and make sure that we're validating the testing and training them up on how to produce these, and just kind of working together as a team. So, that definitely appreciate all of their time and hard work of kind of digging in and getting that done. So it's definitely a partnership, and one where we want to make sure we can educate our manufacturing partners on how to best do this. We're also trying to make sure we're kind of looking for all the edge cases where something can go wrong. So on a manufacturing floor, you want to be able to test for various things that a component's placed wrong, or there's too much solder, or there's all kinds of this isn't really my field, but there's all kinds of things that can go wrong along that process, and you want to make sure you're catching those on the line so that those units are pulled and don't get out to a customer. So there's really extensive testing that's done at kind of every step of the process to make sure that what you get in your final package is something that's going to work well, last well, and be exactly what we want it to be to go out to a customer.
Most of everything that we've talked about has been focused on the hardware side. Most of the rest of the stuff that you have to do, though, I think we could say probably applies to both software and hardware product launches.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think, from here, we're mostly talking about kind of the marketing and PR efforts that go into sharing a product with the world. From an internal perspective, we're doing, a ton of stuff in terms of updating our website, marketing pages, support items. We're getting documentation ready, and also training internal staff. As Richard mentioned to me earlier, in some cases, people even have external support or other people they have to train too. So it can be quite an extensive process there.
Yeah. So if you have, for example, an offshore or just out of house support team that provides your support desk's help for customers, you have to make sure that they either have the materials that they need or that they've gone through training on the new product, depending on how extensive it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want to educate those people as much as you can so they can kind of take on initial questions and you don't have too much going up to tier 2 or tier 3 support.
And you mentioned website updates. You, it's not really just that, okay, well, we have marketing pages for this. You're changing your product catalog that's online. You're adding it to your online store if you have one. There might be pricing considerations that you have to take uh, to be redundant into consideration as you're setting that up, because maybe you want to be able to occasionally sell it at a discount or something like that. So all of that stuff has to be set up before you get the product out there.
Yeah, and as you said, like sometimes that can be in multiple systems. So like one of the things we wanted to do was offer bundles for people who want to buy these in higher volume. If you want to put these in your whole house, we want to, incentivize you with good pricing on that. So we had to go into our back end system and put all those part numbers in and all the, so all that kind of flows. So it can often be a coordination of a lot of different items.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, if you were working with a PR agency, then there's a possibility that some of this stuff can be either supported or assisted by them. Like they may drive some of this marketing work and maybe even get into things like some of the documentation, maybe imagery that you use in your documentation. So, you can get a support assistance on this depending on how you're structured and what your budget is and what your needs are.
Yeah, and in our case, we have different partners we work with for different things. We have a marketing partner that helped us particularly with doing photo shoots and a lot of the digital assets, as well as they're helping with a lot of the online marketing. Our PR firm typically sticks to more just kind of working with the press and kind of facilitating all the stuff around that. So I think it's different in some people's cases they have PR folks internal. Um, and so in that case, it might be more integrated, but everybody's a little bit different there. But yeah, for us, we're working with PR to, they're kind of our channel to different press. And we work with an agency that has some other smart home customers in their mix. So I find they have some pretty good relationships with all the tech press and various kind of other outlets. So we work with them to send out review units and answer questions as people are digging into the product. And so yeah, that's all a lot of work that goes towards, hopefully in the end, somebody writing something nice about your product in their publication.
Well, or in reviews online, if you have just independent bloggers that might find the product, like getting information out there to people is really important for then others to pick it up. And even reviews that you might want people to post on Amazon as well, right? Like if you're selling your product on Amazon, then the more information that people have available to them as they're providing their thoughts on it, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think worth mentioning too is like the traditional, major publications, things have evolved so broadly from there too. There's now, influencer marketing and micro influencers and all the things that people are doing on YouTube. And so it's not what it used to be where you would send something to a newspaper or even a blog. It can be even broader than that now, and just a lot of different people that you can be involved in. And it's all going to depend on what your budget is, how many units you're able to give out, all those kinds of things of how broadly you work, and just kind of your capability and time too to support all those things.
Now, you mentioned that you're going to sell this both on your own site and at Amazon. And so those are two different distribution methods that you need to deal with, right?
Yeah. So and we there's a lot of different ways to work with Amazon. Previously, we had sold product directly to them. We're changing that a little bit, where we're now going to operate in more of a seller central kind of respect. So you still you it's kind of weird. You still send product to them. They house it in their warehouse. It still has a Prime badge on it. It just kind of some of the things on the back end change. And in terms of a seller, we have a lot more control over that. When we were shipping our Smart Outlet 2 last year, we had trouble when we were launching it of actually getting Amazon to place orders so we could get it. Customers wanted to buy it on Amazon, but they have algorithms and all kinds of stuff in the back end that determine some of that stuff of when they actually place orders. So that can be a challenge on that side. So that there's a lot of different ways to do that, but yeah, the seller central way is, I think, how we're going to do it going forward.
And then stuff like what you're doing now, talking about your product on podcasts, just kind of grassroots information sharing is what we're doing here. But if you're Apple, you potentially make your announcement on stage in front of thousands of people and millions of viewers, and there's what goes into planning all of that, right? Like just the scope of the announcement itself and drumming up interest and excitement about the product is enormous. How that can vary.
Yeah. I mean, I can only imagine what goes into some of their launches and things like that. So we don't quite have the budget for keynotes and flying people out and all that. But
And you're not doing something like Microsoft's miserable Windows 7 launch party. You're not going to send out party kits for people that they can have outlet launches.
yeah, I don't know about that one.
Yeah, I would avoid that. I don't think that went so well for them.
Yes. So sometimes people get creative, and it doesn't always work out.
So, I mean, I'm sure that we haven't touched on everything that every company deals with when they're launching a product, but I think this gives people a better idea of what this takes. Last time we talked about the economics of it, like what contributes to the cost of something. And this time we're really digging into what it takes to then take the product that you came up with and get it out there. We didn't even really spend much time talking about designing packaging and figuring out what documentation goes into the box and all of that sort of stuff. Like there's a ton into just that has to do with packaging the product and making it a shippable product as well. So hopefully this gives folks a good idea of, well, maybe why that Kickstarter is a couple months late.
Yeah, and why sometimes people get in a little over their head because they don't realize what all goes into it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think a lot of folks have an idea. They think it's a great idea. They have a business plan and don't understand what it's going to take to pull it off.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you for all of your insight on that. I think that's really helpful, and I certainly enjoyed that discussion.